we had our baby girl, we were overjoyed with love. We want to teach her what matters most in life. Be yourself. Respect others. Watching her, I think about what it was like when I was a kid, learning about the world and what families do together. I grew up playing Monopoly. Everyone did. It's the best-selling board game in America.
Did you guys play Monopoly growing up?
Yes,
I did.
I still do play it.
You still play Monopoly?
I still play Monopoly.
It brought my brothers and sisters together. I'm about to cry now.
So what did Monopoly teach us?
Becoming rich, collecting rent.
Making all the money and winning.
Take everybody's money.
To take down people.
I remember a friend of mine that would get so frustrated with the game that he would just one of those board flippers, would get so mad and frustrated that I was beating him that he would just flip the board.
I have the rules of the game. The last player left in the game wins.
Okay.
Because everybody else has to be declared bankrupt.
Yeah.
When you play Monopoly, in the end you realize that you are violating all sorts of anti-monopoly laws. The Interstate Commerce Act, the Sherman Antitrust Act, the Clayton Antitrust Act. Felony crime is what it really teaches.
That's normal business practice
That's
today.
reality today.
Like the big companies are taking over and the small companies are going bankrupt.
This game has become realistic for this century. It's true life. When we played it, it was not.
We learned that you can get out of jail if you hold the right cards. We learned business practices that are not legal in real life. If anything, perhaps we learned a Monopoly mindset. That streets, utilities, and homes can be bought and sold, and that one person owning all of them was somehow good for everybody.
Monopoly is definitely, it's America.
In politics, big money rules. And the grown-up game of Monopoly is pay to play.
Pay to play would simply be if you give a contribution, you get something in return. A quid pro quo, simple as that.
Pay to play essentially is the kind of new rule of American democracy.
Pay to play is the system we have, which is basically if you show up and you want to influence people and you want to have some impact there, you've got to come with money.
If you want to be part of the democracy, if you want to be in Washington, if you want access to political leaders, you got to pay. It's not enough that you're a citizen.
My dad raised me to do right by others and to set a good example. While doing a forensic accounting job, he told me the story about this political scandal in Ohio that was so absurd. It was the first time I really got it. I got the way money works its way through politics.
The tale of CoinGate is a bizarre tale. I mean, this was a scandal that started with the state of Ohio investing in rare coins.
As a kid in suburban Ohio, Tom Noe delivered newspapers to pay for his coin collection. He became so good at buying and selling coins, he dropped out of college his sophomore year at Bowling Green to trade coins full-time. But he wasn't just putting his money into rare coins.
He testified under oath that the reason he gave campaign contributions was to keep his business alive. That's the term he used.
Tom Noe raised so much money for Republicans across Ohio that he started to get some major returns.
He was appointed to the Board of Regents, which sets education policy in Ohio. Again, we're talking about a college dropout.
College dropout to head all of higher education in Ohio. You couldn't find one college graduate in the state of Ohio to head your higher education board? It was clear it was pay to play.
The state designed his quarter for the bicentennial, the quarter program. He got appointed to the coin committee. Ultimately, this all worked out when he raised money for the president. The Bush administration named him chairman of a committee on the U.S. Mint.
Tom Noe put money into campaigns and got special access. And then he got $50 million in state money meant for injured workers.
There was a big pot of money that we hadn't called, and that was the Bureau of Workers' Compensation. They provide insurance to employers throughout the state. I called the Bureau and said, do you do business with Tom Noe? Does he buy gold for you? And they said, no, he doesn't buy gold for us. He buys rare coins.
You have a very well-connected political guy. Gets a contract to invest $50 million of injured worker and small business money in rare coins.
In not only coins, but he invested in collectibles, Beanie Babies, LeBron James jerseys.
Are these conventional investments?
No.
They're not conventional.
No.
It's nothing but a money laundering operation. Because the reality is, look, if we give him this money, he will kick that money back into political campaigns. And that's what he really pleaded guilty to.
Ohio is a microcosm for America. Once I saw how pay-to-play was working in Ohio, I realized it was going on across the country. When politicians repaid their donors, it's not with their own money, it's public money. And that amount of money going to the donors is way more than they contributed.
The return on investment in politics for the money you spend, either through lobbying fees that you pay or campaign contributions, is incomprehensible. It's far better than almost anything anybody is doing at any company or any business.
I believe that getting the money out of politics is the greatest moral challenge of our generation, because it is the cancer underlying all the cancers, whether it's climate change, whether it's our high child poverty rates, the corruption of our food supply by GMOs, the fact that we have the highest mass incarceration rate in the world.
Painful truth of the matter is that in America today, powerful people give campaign contributions as a business expense. We have a bought and sold political process.
We have a one-person, one-vote system, and they're trying to turn it into a $1, one vote, and that's plutocracy, not democracy.
These are people who are paying politicians to underfund our schools. These are people who are paying money to create results that are absolutely damaging to society, and that's what pay-to-play is. It's an ugly, ugly reality.
As it is, my baby girl doesn't have the promise of America that my parents or grandparents had. She won't have the same educational opportunities that I did. She won't know the air, sun, or water that we had growing up. How do we get past the pay-to-play system? Because I'm ready to be a board flipper.
A lot of people are advocating that the rich get richer and the poor gets poorer. Well, that's only because you don't understand what's going to happen to you. You see, it's all just a game, ladies and gentlemen. And the quality of your living depends entirely upon your ability to play the game. And I play the game, play the game, play the game, play the game.
We have a good democracy in principle, but does it still work to serve the people? I asked some smart people.
John.
Professor Chomsky.
Good to see you. Come on in.
Thanks so much.
U.S. public opinion is very well studied. We know a lot about it. And both political parties are way to the right of the population on a host of major issues. That's understandable, too, because the parties are basically two factions of one party, the business party.
To have the democracy so corrupted by campaign financing is really a tragedy. I think it's the single most important issue to change.
What we have now is a two-party duopoly, where the two major political parties have a chokehold on the political system. And this is sucking the oxygen out of our public discourse.
In our government, we've got such a well-developed professional class of politicians, what I call the insiders, that it makes it hard for people on the outside to really think it makes sense to waste their time or spend their time trying to change the way government works. But I think in certain moments in the history of a democracy, it's essential that people on the outside can wake up and take back control of their government and shake it up a bit and then give it back to people with some new instructions.
It's not about left versus right. It's about insiders versus outsiders. So, how can an outsider have a voice? If we could figure out the rules of the game, maybe there's a way outsiders could win. While I was in Ohio investigating the CoinGate scandal, I met with Paul Hackett, who spoke out at a time when people who criticized the Iraq War were shouted down for being unpatriotic.
They're terrorists living in those countries
This administration has mismanaged this war, has mismanaged the military.
What made Paul Hackett's criticism of the Iraq War stand out was that he had just returned from the front lines in Fallujah and was now running for Congress as an anti-war Democrat.
You're watching one man's journey from a war zone to a political battlefield. Paul Hackett, the first veteran of the Iraq War to run for Congress.
Have you used the term chicken hawk? And what's that mean?
Chicken hawk is a person who advocates war in a cavalier, unknowing way, saying things like, bring it on. My Marines, my soldiers, men who I fought with, saw that as cheerleading for the insurgents, and that is dangerous.
I'm outspoken? Oh, there's your problem right there.
Paul Hackett's sobering assessment of Iraq showed me how we need leaders bringing their experience from Main Street, not like most of Congress, millionaires that can afford to run.
When I got off the plane here in Cincinnati on March 18th of 2005, my wife and a bunch of friends met me at the airport. One of my friends told me that literally the day before, our congressman had stepped down and he said, "You've got to run in this race," to which I said, "You're out of your fucking mind." And this sense of, you know, I just survived Iraq, I'm Superman, I can do anything. Before my wife and I left the airport that night, we made up our mind that I would run in that special election. She sort of smiled and she looked at me, she said, "Well, you're gonna be home every night, right?" And I said, "I'm gonna be home every night." And she said, "And nobody's gonna be shooting at you, right?" And I said, "No, pop shots in the press, I can handle that." The comment that I made that was quoted in USA Today and in the New York Times, where I called Bush a chicken hawk son of a bitch, began to sort of catch within the blogosphere. We raised about $1 million online from 15,000 Americans.
Paul Hackett's candidacy became a national referendum on the Iraq War. If Hackett got to Congress from the most conservative county in swing state Ohio, it would be a stunning rebuke to the Bush administration.
The Republican National Committee was quoted as saying, "We're going to go to Cincinnati and we're going to bury Hackett." I'm a guy who came back from Iraq, so I'm kind of familiar with what's involved in burying people and burying friends. My daughter, who was 8 then, saw it in the front page of the Enquirer and read it, and, you know, and it's not a conversation you want to have with your daughter. You know, she said something to me like, you know, "You survived Iraq. Why is the president send people to bury you?" So, I said, "Hey, you know what? Fuck them. Bring them on."
Paul Hackett's opponent in this special election for Congress was Ohio State Representative Gene Schmidt.
When you look at the bigger picture, most of the folks in that part of the world really don't hate us. They like Western ideas. They like our music. They like our dress. They like our food. I mean, Kentucky Fried Chicken is growing by leaps and bounds there. But you do have a handful of folks that really hate us. 9/11 was the culmination of that. That night when we went to bed on 9/11 with 3,000 American lives lost, we were scared. I was scared. I know you were scared, and I know that America was scared. But the next morning, we woke up with the resolve that we had to stop this violence against us and against the world. That's why we're there.
John Allison, a member of the staff government.
Gene Schmidt was asked about her past dealings with Tom Noe, since the CoinGate scandal was unfolding at the same time.
What do you say to this?
Well, I haven't seen the article, and I don't know who Tom Noe is.
Keep going.
You know, it's been such a long time, but I do remember vaguely when I was on finance, there were a lot of people, to be perfectly honest with you.
Tom Noe, you don't know.
I have no idea who Tom Noe is. I've never met that man. To align me with someone I have never met. If he walked in the room, Dan, I wouldn't know what he looked like.
During the course of Election Day, the reports were coming in and Paul Hackett was winning.
It was crazy. I mean, it was insane. You know, I mean,
news trucks. I mean, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 news trucks and people walking backwards, you know, the mics up on the booms and everything like that. We were winning going into Claremont County. Claremont County was the last county to report. It's also the county from which Gene Schmidt, my opponent, hails from.
There was a news report that Claremont County had stopped the counting of votes.
Claremont County's got a long history of ballot problems.
The Board of Elections closed down in the middle of the count, shut the doors. All the observers were asked to leave, as I understand it, because there was too much humidity in the air-conditioned room and the voting ballots were sticking together and couldn't be fed through the machines.
The count in Claremont County starts coming up very much for Schmidt.
And we lost Claremont County, and we lost by a far higher number than we thought we'd lose. And Claremont County was statistically inconsistent with the other counties that she won. So we were sort of left scratching our heads.
In her first speech to Congress, Gene Schmidt broke House protocol by attacking another member of the House, Representative John Murtha, for his suggestion that American troops in Iraq be redeployed.
Asked me to send Congressman Murtha a message that cowards cut and run, Marines never do. Danny and the rest of America and the world want the assurance from this body that we will see this through.
Prior to serving in Congress, John Murtha was a decorated 37-year veteran, whereas Gene Schmidt was, I'm just guessing from her outfit, a 1970s gymnast.
It's hard to figure out the game when the rules can be changed or broken. I learned this firsthand from Subodh Chandra, an attorney in Cleveland. What I liked most about Subodh was that he had adapted the CoinGate scandal into a puppet show to amuse his triplets.
The money that was left for injured workers, and you know what I invested it in? Rare coins, Beanie Babies, and autographed baseballs!
Subodh Chandra had run in the Democratic primary for Ohio Attorney General in hopes of cleaning up state government after the Tom Noe scandal.
One of my biggest fears about this election is that there may be some in my party, the Democratic Party, who simply want to substitute our culture of corruption and cronyism for their culture of corruption and cronyism. And to me, that's not acceptable. When I first decided to run, I had a meeting with the Ohio Democratic Party chairman. We spent a lot of time discussing my name, and I'm ready to discuss my name for 10 minutes, 30 minutes, but an hour, hour and a half, it just doesn't make any sense. It seems to me that there were many in my party that were simply too concerned about my name and not concerned enough about my ability to communicate, to generate excitement. Can a guy who looks like that with that name possibly win statewide in Ohio? And I have a two-word response for you: Barack Obama. How is it possible? It's possible because in America, anything is possible.
And there's seats on this car. Uh-huh.
I came to appreciate how important the primaries are, which decide which candidate gets to run in the general election. Subodh's opponent in the Democratic primary for Attorney General, State Senator Mark Dan, had made a name for himself by pushing investigations in the wake of CoinGate.
There's really been a kind of a looting of state government that's gone on by campaign contributors and by office holders. I'm going to dig and push and poke and prod and expose and create transparency so that people can then draw their own truth.
In the Democratic primary for Attorney General, Mark Dan beat Subodh Chandra.
I had people who worked for the Ohio Democratic Party come to me and tell me that on the chairman's orders, our literature was destroyed throughout the state, which good Democratic donors had spent their hard-earned dollars on. But at the chairman's orders, at event after event, and at the party headquarters, our literature was destroyed.
Mark Dan ended up beating the previous Attorney General, who had ties to Tom Noe.
She took thousands from convicted felon Tom Noe, then admitted she did nothing to stop Noe's crimes.
I want you to hold us to a higher standard. Are you willing to do that?
Today's the day the sex scandal in the Attorney General's office blew up. 2 of the AG's top aides got fired.
This comes after weeks of stories about Animal House-like antics and
an unwanted sex toy.
That was the weirdest position I've ever been in my life.
I don't know how many people here expected me to win the election, but I certainly wasn't among them.
Fighting pay to play is difficult when the top cop isn't doing his job. But just when I was starting to figure out the game, the Supreme Court rewrote the rules for spending in elections.
A Supreme Court ruling that may change politics in this country more dramatically than anything else this court has done in generations.
This decision, Citizens United, is a case that will live in infamy.
Last week, the Supreme Court reversed a century of law that I believe will open the floodgates for special interests, including foreign corporations, to spend without limit in our elections.
What's going to happen to elections? Corporations will be allowed to give money. Corporations will be allowed to broadcast programs that are in favor of one side or another. It'll basically be no more rules.
In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court threw out a century of campaign finance laws in favor of some small home video company. So, who is Citizens United? And how did they pull this off?
Citizens United, the group, has been around since 1988. Its membership really is propagandists who've worked sort of on the furthest fringes of the Republican right. The group has sort of specialized in slash and burn propaganda hit jobs.
Floyd Brown, one of the creators of the group, he worked with Lee Atwater and other Bush campaign people to really pioneer the strategy of using an outside group to run a very vicious attack campaign. And they made what's known as the Willie Horton ad.
Willie Horton was a black man, so the ad was used particularly in the South to stir up white voters against Dukakis.
Dukakis not only opposes the death penalty, he allowed first-degree murderers to have weekend passes from prison. One was Willie Horton, who murdered a boy in a robbery, stabbing him 19 times.
It is a perfect example of how money can be used to fund an ad that totally distorts a race and totally distorts the debate.
David Bossie, president of Citizens United, filed an FEC complaint claiming that commercials for Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11 should be considered ads for John Kerry's presidential campaign, since the movie ads showed John Kerry's opponent, President George Bush. When the Federal Election Commission denied that the movie ads could be considered political spots, that gave David Bossie an idea. In 2008, he ran ads for his movie about Hillary Clinton while she was campaigning for president.
Calling it a movie, I mean, it was really just a series of scabrous innuendos.
Ruthless, vindictive,
venal, sneaky, liar is a good one.
It was a fairly narrow question. Could this self-proclaimed media company have its product ruled not to be a campaign contribution, but just simply a piece of journalism?
But something perverse happened. It went way beyond Citizens United. Chief Justice John Roberts took a bizarre interest in this case. And after the initial arguments said, you know what, we want you to argue this case differently. Instead of talking about this one film and this specific incident, we want you to talk about regulation of corporate money and union money and private expenditures in our politics. We want you to develop briefs based on that. We want to argue a wholly different case. So the case was widened out from one incident with one little group and one film to a discussion of whether we should have regulations at all on corporate money and other private spending to influence our elections.
They said money in political campaigns, and they've said this forever, is the equivalent of speech. When I give you money to run for election, it's the same as me speaking. So we're under First Amendment analysis. We have to be very careful whenever we limit money.
I don't think our founding fathers and mothers were thinking about corporate treasuries as part of the free speech code.
What speech are we really quieting when every individual member of a corporation can speak for themselves?
You can put as much money as you want into a race, and so can Walmart. So it's your free speech / money against their free speech / money. Who do you think has more free speech / money, you or Walmart?
Where does this leave children? Children have no financial leverage. So if only those with financial leverage get the power of speech and thus the power of influence, then of course the rights of our children are dropped to the floor first.
An election is a debate. And if the debate is distorted by having one side have so much greater resources than the other, that sometimes may distort the ability to decide the debate on the merits. You want to be sure that it's a fair fight.
When money equals speech, speech ceases to be free. And what you've got is a very few who have a monopoly on the discussion.
As much as Citizens United saw their freedom of speech threatened by election laws, they apparently had no problem using the law to threaten other people's speech.
After the Supreme Court ruling in Citizens United, we formed a group called Citizens United Against Citizens United. The group Citizens United, for whom the case is named, didn't take kindly to our protest of the ruling. And shortly thereafter, we got a letter from a very high-powered law firm out of Washington, D.C., threatening us with trademark infringement, threatening to sue us.
Could this really be true? Can a corporation monopolize a word we all use? Well, they can try. I learned this from Professor Ralph Ansbach, who fought a 10-year legal battle against Parker Brothers in a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court, all over the name of his board game, Anti-Monopoly.
At the university, and we were talking about how Adam Smith hated monopolies even more than he disliked government. I started looking for a game that fun way showed that monopoly is the disease of capitalism. And then I decided, well, if there's no game around like that, maybe I should invent myself. And that's how I got into the game invention business. I had checked with lawyers and they said there would be no problem because the courts had already found that if a name is the opposite of existing trademark, there would be no confusion that I had a right to do it. And we had orders for over 1 million games, and then the roof fell in. We got a letter from General Mills Fund Group and Parker Brothers threatening us with lawsuits and demanding that we take all our games and destroy them.
Under court order, Ralph's board games were buried in a landfill. Facing a costly, losing legal battle, Ralph was about to give up when he received an anonymous tip.
I was in a television station. A lady calls in and said, they have a lot of nerve to sue you, Professor Ansbach, when they stole the game.
As Ralph started digging into the history of Parker Brothers, he uncovered something he never would have imagined. The official story of Monopoly's inventor was a fraud.
I asked Monopoly how the game was created, and they gave me this story that said, in 1933, Charles Darrow created a prototype of a new game using materials from his own home, based on the streets of Atlantic City, New Jersey. Does this jibe with your research?
It's a total lie, and they know it. Darrow was a con man who copied the game. The question arises, who did invent Monopoly?
It was actually invented by, and this is not real well known, by a woman named Lizzie J. McGee. Had really intended it mainly for educational purposes, and it was called the Landlord Scandal.
McGee was a follower of the 19th century philosopher and economist Henry George. So the game of Monopoly, original game of Monopoly, the landlord's game, was meant to show that the monopolization of land in the hands of the few was effectively a burden on those who would do productive labor in society. What then happens? Monopoly goes through a transformation. For close to 30 years after its invention in 1903, Monopoly remains a folk game. It's public domain. It is as if it was chess or checkers or dominoes. Anybody could play it. In 1930, after years and years of being this public domain game, it is effectively monopolized by Charles Brace Darrow. He had learned the game from a group of Quakers in Atlantic City. Then Darrow has the chutzpah to then claim that he was the sole inventor of the game. Parker Brothers helps out Darrow to secure a fraudulent patent on the game of Monopoly. Its history is erased and its meaning is inverted. So now Monopoly serves to glorify monopolistic acquisition. It glorifies the landlord, and it becomes the best-selling proprietary game in human history.
In court, Ralph produced depositions from people who had played the game on homemade game boards or oilcloths growing up decades before Darrow, and they all called it Monopoly. Ralph Anspach won his trademark case against Monopoly. But Parker Brothers repeated the Darrow legend to newspapers and magazines for years, eclipsing the story of the landlord's game. This showed me how corporations can use marketing to take over the public record, while at the same time taking over an idea that's been in the public domain. 5 years after beating Paul Hackett for Congress, Gene Schmidt had gone from war hawk to deficit hawk and become a Tea Party fiscal conservative.
This is why we are upset. This is the bill. The bill that will ruin our health care as we know it. Yes.
The Tea Party had sprung up at this time as a conservative force against government spending, with one of their concerns being big money flooding politics. So they might not have appreciated that Gene Schmidt was taking more money from Turkish lobbyists than anyone else in Congress, at the same time leading the effort to prevent the US from recognizing Turkey's involvement in the Armenian genocide. A local businessman of Armenian descent, David Krikorian, got so fed up with Gene Schmidt, he ran for her seat in Congress.
After much reflection and discussion with family, friends, advisors, and party leaders, I will seek the Democratic nomination.
My opposition in the primary, nice guys, but, you know, it's not a snowball's chance in Bermuda of winning this race, both the primary and the general.
His opponent was Surya Yalamanchili, a political newcomer who seemed to be running against the pay-to-play system itself.
He is not part of the PAC, running a rather non-traditional campaign. He's also not part of the PAC, as in Political Action Committee. He takes no money from any group, even traditional Democratic supporters like Big Labor.
You talk to most people, whether they're Democrats or whether they're Republicans, they want to talk about fiscal responsibility. And everybody agrees the government spends too much and they waste all this money. And then you look at the elections, and you look at them raising millions of dollars, and you look at these fancy campaign headquarters and all of this, and you say, wait a minute, don't you guys see that there's a disconnect here? You applaud the people putting in hundreds of thousands of dollars of their own money and running these campaigns that could probably be a lot more efficient. And then you're expecting them, when they go to Washington, to all of a sudden be fiscally responsible? It's a joke. Perfect. All right, let's get out of here. When I saw the news segment last night, the reason he got this coverage, they made a big deal. He's $150,000 cash on hand, and they showed these glamour shots of his headquarters. It's another example, you know, of what money bought him this positive coverage. And they don't do their digging, which is the really infuriating part, to say, wait a minute, most of this money came from him. So now I'll show you campaign headquarters, also known as my house. And I've got my mom and my cousin actually staying with me right now, because they're helping to address envelopes. It obviously takes time to get a hand-addressed envelope. I'll sign all 25,000 letters. This is what $2,200 in postage looks like.
Surya had been a brand manager at Procter & Gamble and a contestant on The Apprentice. Surya brought his marketing sensibility to campaigning, and his low-cost model might be a solution to the influence of donors.
When you can't pay to play with the big boys, but you still want to play, you're everything. You're your treasurer, you're the campaign strategist, you're the campaign manager, you are your chief fundraiser, you are your issues researcher, you are your photocopy maker, you write your own letters. These are about $33,000. That's well over half of the campaign budget. Yeah. I'm a first-time candidate, and so this whole process has been a little bit, let's say, shocking in terms of the amount of time that you spend in fundraising, at least 3/4 of your day.
If you can't raise money, you can't get your message out. So no matter how great you are, no matter how great your ideas are, if you can't raise the money, nobody's going to hear you.
Before actually I even declared, I emailed Paul Hackett, who was one of the first people I had ever read about who was running for office that I could relate to. Say, here's a regular guy who just said he had enough and he wasn't a politician. A true politician can ask unflinchingly for a $1,000 check. I don't know that I'm there yet. Oh, wow, that's nice. This actually means so much to me. We wanted to send you something to show our support of your campaign. Justin Casillo, he's running for Congress against John Boehner. It's because he also is fed up by what he sees.
Those of us that get elected never get elected by ourselves. It takes the help of a lot of people. All elections are serious. This is the next election, so it's really serious.
Well, and the big frustration with raising money as a candidate is that it's a chicken and the egg.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, it takes money to raise money, and you got to raise money to get money. As a first-time candidate and someone new to the process,
Yeah, both of us, yeah.
to understand that just how much of your time and energy is devoted to raising money.
What did you think it would be? Because I thought it would be like, 1/4 of my time, and it's not.
Yeah, I guess I thought it would be not more than half.
Yeah.
It's definitely.
It's almost all, right?
We've raised 30.
Great.
That's almost all through call time.
I spend literally a minute, Surya, Yalam, and Chile. They're like, what? Huh?
Right.
And they're irritated, and I'm telling this is my name. And they're like, what's your name? Oh, what do you want? And then by that point, they're already aggravated. And then you're asking for money. The conversation does not go well.
Pencil it out. If you start running, let's say 15 months before the election, 12 months before the election, pencil out how much you have to raise every day to get enough money, and almost all of it goes for television commercials. The only thing people know about you is what they see on those television commercials.
Everyone who's running for office now has to spend huge amounts of their time soliciting money from deep-pocketed individuals with rich people and corporate donors rather than at campaign events interacting with regular people.
If you're spending 30 to 70% of your time raising money from the tiniest slice of the 1%, then obviously that experience is going to distort your capacity to be governing on behalf of the rest of us.
The absurdity of it all was starting to get to me. I started seeing things. I thought I was hallucinating. A Monopoly man? Someone had actually gone to the trouble to put a Monopoly man up all over town. But why on earth? Eventually, I tracked down the street artist who goes by Alec Monopoly.
While the city sleeps, I am wide awake.
The idea for the Monopoly really started when the economy first started to tank with so many evil corporate people and money interests. That the Monopoly guy, for me, he is the corporate guy. Like, I did a painting of the Monopoly guy running across America, kind of symbolizing that corporations run America. And they run all the imagery you see outside. So that's why I kind of wanted to throw it back out there, that someone actually realizes that this is going on and that you can do something about it. When I go and graffiti on a billboard over some other ad, it's not only putting my art out there, I'm changing something that was an ad for money to art.
I liked this. You could really get a message across. Street art seemed to stand out from everything else in the city because it had a personal touch. It's not trying to sell you anything or get your money. It's trying to give you something, an image, a thought, someone's vision.
My generation, people in their 30s, we very much can tell the difference between something that's authentic and something that's inauthentic, and that's the number one thing that matters to us. We don't want to be BS to. We don't want to be spoken to or through. We want somebody to talk to us and be real with us and respect us as adults. Politics is so soured this for everybody. The guy at the printer couldn't believe it when I told him I was going to hand sign all this. He's like, you're going to do what? He's like, no one does that. That's the point.
You know, it might have a nice personal folksy touch, but that's such a waste of time for a candidate to do that.
Maybe I shouldn't have had them go through the folding machine before I had to sign them.
Yeah, I know he doesn't have any staff, and maybe he has some hidden volunteers somewhere, but...
There's a young guy by the name of Surya Yalamanchili. Frankly, he's a puppet for the machine Democrats in Hamilton County. They want somebody who's basically just going to do what is told, and he was their willing or complicit tool.
This is the first time we've been above the fold in this campaign, this race, period. Democrats rebuke Krikorian. Candidate allegedly mocked rival's name.
Gene Schmidt managed to turn the Democratic primary upside down, even though she wasn't even running in it.
If I look at this someday and I look like I really look, you're a dead man.
It started with an open letter Gene Schmidt wrote to David Krikorian after she received a complaint following one of his campaign events.
So, dear Mr. Krikorian, the purpose of this letter is to give you fair warning that I will not stand by and allow you to use racism to smear your primary opponent's name. You stated, according to those veterans present, now do you really think a guy with a name like that has a chance of ever being elected?
After Gene Schmidt's rebuke of David Krikorian, local Democratic Party leaders spoke out against Krikorian as well.
4 years ago, we had a primary for Ohio Attorney General. Subodh Chandra, also an Indian American. I don't know how many times I heard it. Was, do you really think that he could get any votes in Southern Ohio? Do you really think that he could win? I heard that and I turned a blind eye to it and I ignored it. But when David said that to me, if anyone in my party can justify that, then I have to question whether that's the party for me.
Well, the name game controversy in the 2nd District grows more contentious tonight.
I think Progress has now blogged about this. Andrew Sullivan at The Atlantic.
Quote, now you really think a guy with a name like that has a chance of ever being elected? David Krikorian, today's worst person in the world.
I asked David Krikorian about this condemnation and what it felt like to be Keith Olbermann's worst person in the world.
Keith Olbermann is a buffoon. The guy's way too over the top to be taken seriously.
I posted Krikorian's response, but it didn't seem to help him much.
Mr. Krikorian responded, and as you will find out shortly, he might have just taken the hit and stayed down.
Keith Olbermann is a buffoon. Last night's program was sponsored by Procter & Gamble's Oil of Olay brand, which is the exact brand that Surya Yalamanchili worked for. So how did they cover that story last night?
There's no conspiracy to keep David Krikorian out of Congress, except maybe tomorrow when the voters go to the polls.
Thanks. Oh, dear God. Scariest thing? He still might win.
The race was tight. On election day, every vote in this primary would matter.
How's the turnout been from what you've seen?
Terrible. No one's coming out. Or 98% of the data in. I'm up by 80-something votes.
The political editor says it's too close to call.
And hey, so he conceded on TV?
This is very surprising from my perspective.
You know, we rose to every challenge. We raised $70,000 in under 3 months. I've never raised a penny in my life. We just became the Democratic nominee to challenge Gene Schmidt in November. So that's a long way to go.
But Surya would have to step up his campaign efforts to compete with a seasoned incumbent.
I know you in the room are impassioned because you're here to make calls and get out that vote and go door to door as you have been for me. But let's do it one step further. Let's think of somebody else in our Rolodex on our Christmas card list that we can call. We'll get them to work because it is that important.
It's not just Gene Schmidt that Surya is running up against. During Surya's race, a story broke revealing one of the biggest sources of anonymous money that's been flooding our elections.
Right before the election, I obtained documents. It was a memo and an invitation.
David and Charles Koch are the owners of the second or third largest private industry in the country. They have oil and gas interest, they have coal interest, they have chemical interest. They happen to be both billionaires, and so they don't have any problem with financial resources. Over the last 10 years, I've learned that twice a year, they've invited the Glenn Becks and the Bill O'Reillys and the leadership, particularly on the Republican conservative side,
to come to these very private, multi-day retreats, like gated resorts.
Resorts in Aspen or Palm Springs.
Planning for the next election.
To coordinate their spending and to spread the conservative movement.
They talk about how to dismantle environmental regulation. They talk about how to do micro-targeting for voters. They talk about policy. They talk about money and raising money.
We were able to hear Charles Koch welcome all the millionaires and billionaires, and it was mostly billionaires.
To influence the next election. They actually said that past events had featured Justices Scalia and Thomas. Not attended, featured. When we looked at the timing of this, we realized this could very well put these justices at the event just before the Citizens United decision was either being heard or as it was being deliberated.
He fits into a larger jigsaw of conservative and right-wing groups that made Citizens United possible, basically.
Ever since the early 70s, what we used to call big business has been intent on disabling or subverting democracy. There's a fairly well-known document that people call the Powell Memo that Lewis Powell, who at the time was a corporate lawyer, this is before he was a Supreme Court justice, he wrote this in 1971.
Lewis Powell said, if you're in business, you want to survive in this new era where people are demanding clean air, clean water, good food. If you want to beat that back, you got to pour huge amounts of money into creating an infrastructure that works not in the public sphere, but behind the scenes.
He said essentially to the business community, you have got to change American democracy, not just as individual corporations. They needed institutions such as the Chamber of Commerce. They needed to have their own litigation strategy, challenging regulations, have a much bigger, more powerful presence in Washington. But also think tanks, the Heritage Foundation, the American Enterprise Institute, in an attempt to get favorable regulations or no regulations, tax benefits of all kinds, subsidies, big agriculture, big pharmaceutical companies, military contractors. They built vast lobbying machines into almost another branch of government, drowning out the voices of ordinary Americans.
The fight for the voice of ordinary Americans was something I came to appreciate through Free Humanity, a street artist and Alec Monopoly's best friend.
Street artists are trying to plant a certain seed out in society that isn't there at the moment with art, and seizing the opportunity of doing it illegally, even though they might get arrested, even though they might be thrown in jail. That's what my art is about. I'm trying to do something for the kids that ride the bus, that don't get to see art, for the moms that are getting milk in the morning, you know what I mean, that are poor. Give them something colorful and beautiful, hopefully, to look at. Who owns the public space? Is it corporations that get laws changed because they pay off lobbyists that pay off their congressmen to change laws to allow more billboards? Or is it the people that pay their taxes and actually make this government function?
While I was watching Free Humanity paint a lotus on a rooftop, it occurred to me that if he gets caught doing this, the police are gonna arrest him and put him in jail. And he doesn't get to hide behind his made-up street name. But when corporations commit crimes, no one goes to jail. It's almost like being a corporation is a get-out-of-jail-free card. Corporations can't die. And even the richest corporations end up paying no taxes. This is the magic of corporate personhood.
It would not be inaccurate to say that a corporation is a sociopath. Corporations have one single purpose, and that's to make profit. And there is no conscience associated with that. It does not fear bad air or bad water. It doesn't fear epidemics or sickness. That kind of sociopathy is creating a sociopathic culture in this country and a sociopathic governance system, and it's destroying America.
Well, I think a lot of the criticism about Citizens United is not well-founded. The idea that corporations are going to take over American politics, that's nonsense. Corporations have already taken over American politics.
So how do you break the cycle of pay to play? Hopefully, you get someone into office who isn't there as a business expense.
You need more than one person for an assembly line.
In his campaign to bring accountability to Congress, Surya had achieved an improbable feat. He had outraised Gene Schmidt in personal donations. But after Gene Schmidt collected her corporate PAC money, she was well ahead of Surya.
You know, during the primary when we talked, I think I probably had like $60,000 raised or something at that point. That was it, you know, which was a lot, enough to win the primary and all that. But I've raised $250,000 now, all on individual donations. Typically, that is then supplemented by $200,000, $300,000 in PAC money. And the difference is that I didn't do that. I have voicemails, people saying, we just need to know where to send the check, PACs. And I've had to call them back and tell them that I appreciate their support. And it means a lot to me, but I can't accept their check. So there was at least 100,000, probably 200,000 conservatively, dollars that are probably on the table that I left, you know, that I said no. So even if I probably had the money, you can't fit what we're going to talk about tonight into commercials, and that's why I think this is so important.
Surya's debate with Gene Schmidt was his last chance to make an impression on the majority of voters before the election.
There can be no flash. We're going to be on the air here in about 2 minutes. About 2 minutes. There you go. All right. So I go get you backstage.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Live.
This is the 2010 Ohio 2nd District Congressional Debate.
How would you reform how political campaigns are financed? That question to Mrs. Schmidt, and you have 90 seconds.
You know, if I had a magic wand, I would take money out of the equation, but I don't. But I believe it goes against the Constitution to say that the American public can't participate in this election process in the ways that they want to. We've got the internet, we know what people put on a campaign, but to say that we can take money out of the equation, it's just not going to happen.
Free speech, it's in the Constitution. Corporations do not have free speech. I mean, corporations can't vote, and this notion that they should be able to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to push any point of view that they want is kind of crazy. And $3.5 billion flowing to Washington, $1.5 million that my opponent's taken. I haven't taken a single penny in special interest money.
Congress continues to be more and more partisan. After this election, it's likely to get worse. How can the country move forward without compromise, without the two sides working together?
It takes 218 people to get a vote accomplished in Washington, and his side has the votes. So yeah, I can kick and scream, and I do.
30 seconds to rebut.
I think you heard it all right there in his side. I'm on your side. That's the only side that matters to me. That is the only side.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, no displays. Thank you.
Can I get a first autograph? Sure.
Surya performed well in his debate. But would it matter?
Did either candidate make you think any differently?
Well, I have to be honest with you. I vote Republican because I'm very much into right to life. And so I'm pretty much a one-issue voter.
Surya's district was made up of a majority of older, conservative voters. It didn't get that way by accident, and it might be the biggest hurdle in Surya's path. Congressional districts are redrawn every 10 years and usually favor one party.
It's got candidates choosing their voters rather than voters choosing their candidates. So of course it's a major incumbent protection technique, completely undemocratic.
Another Ohio candidate for Congress showed me how drastically her district was redrawn by Republicans.
So this was all one district before?
Yes.
And then all this got added to the district?
Yes.
The art of gerrymandering, it's true of most of America, and it's certainly true in Ohio. Once a party gets into power, it can make its power more concrete
and stabilize it by redrawing districts. They get elected, then they redraw the line so their re-election is made more secure. With each election, they become more powerful. They have more relationships with big business in Ohio, and we saw that happen throughout the whole nation.
On Election Day in Ohio, you never know what will happen.
The polls are open all across the tri-state now, and already there's some problems in some locations.
Congresswoman Jean Schmidt encountered some trouble. Her ballot would not scan when she tried to vote this morning in Loveland.
I voted chili. Yeah, I'm very excited to. First sign, not a positive one, but you know, we'll see. Yeah. How am I feeling? It's a mix of emotions because I think back over the last year and there's so much stuff that happened, you know? And so I think about all that stuff. You can't help but wish that somehow it could turn out different. So, you know, there's that frustration with, it's just disappointment. I mean, I guess it's not that complicated.
The 2010 elections led to a Republican takeover of the House of Representatives, in large part because of the Tea Party, supported by the Koch brothers. Out of 1,216 winning candidates, 1,053 of them received contributions from the Kochs.
First day of the new Republican Congress in January, David Koch was there. He was in John Boehner's suite, in the speaker's suite, congratulating him, meeting with the new chairman of all the new committees, and actually throwing a big party for all the new Republicans he had just helped elect. On his way out of the building of the Capitol, I actually had an impromptu interview.
What you're expecting from the new Congress?
Well, cut the hell out of spending and balance the budget and reduce regulations and support business.
For the Koch brothers, supporting business apparently meant taking away the rights of workers. New Republican governors in Ohio and Wisconsin rushed through radical new laws championed by the Koch brothers and others that stripped the rights of government employees to bargain collectively, essentially killing public unions and their ability to spend money in elections. This was brazenly anti-democratic. Protests swelled in Madison, Columbus, and across the country. And after digging, people found out where these laws had come from. The American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC. The name of the secret powerhouse of pay-to-play was right before me all along.
Probably the worst example of a pay-to-play catastrophe is this monstrosity called ALEC. And it is a straight-up pay-to-play organization where corporate lobbyists and legislators sit down together and come up with crazy laws that hurt America.
And ALEC was formed in 1973 by political players and business players who were losing everything. They were losing elections, they were losing lobbying fights, they were losing regulatory fights, and they figured out, man, we gotta change this. We have gotta protect our business interests. So they began to create model legislation on issues that the corporate interests could not win in an open, honest fight. But if they manipulated the process long enough at the state level, they could achieve dramatic change.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey.
There's a new way to make laws these days.
Alec's the name, and here I am, a model Alec bill, soon to be law. Corporations have made government of the people obsolete.
Alec has forged a unique partnership between state legislators and leaders from the corporate and business community. This partnership offers businessmen the extraordinary opportunity to apply their talents to solve our nation's problems.
The American Legislative Exchange Council describes itself as a nonpartisan organization. Actually, what ALEC is a stealth business lobbyist, crafting about 1,000 pieces of legislation. However, if you look at ALEC's tax filings with the IRS, you will not see any evidence that the organization lobbies.
I was starting to realize that corporate speech wasn't some abstract thing affecting our future. My little girl was already being impacted by corporate speech, just by going out in public.
Why is it that the streets are an effective place for political expression?
The streets are the only place for political expression. There is no other venue. There's no way for me to compete. I have little girls. I have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old. And daily we drive by billboards and they say, Mom, we need to get some makeup. Mom, I want to be wearing that dress. Am I too heavy? Am I too thin? The bombardment of ad space is not something that I asked for, and it's my right to talk back. I have something better to say than what you should be wearing, or what color your lipstick should be, or how big your tits are, if your dick works, or if your dick doesn't work. There are things going on everywhere that to me are bigger than all that. I'm a have-not. All I have is my ability to climb high and paint. I don't have a corporation backing me. I'm a single mother. I get no child support. My 8-year-old has autism, so I stay up late at night and I use the only tools I have. I paint, and I believe that that is my right as a citizen.
Where else is there besides the streets? On Wall Street, I saw a solid gold Monopoly board, bejeweled with diamonds, rubies, and emeralds. This board game was worth over $1 million. Only heads of state got to play on this. All of this together seemed so absurd. It was like a trophy to the pay-to-play system. You shouldn't have to win the lottery to have a voice in this country.
If you're going to challenge the money power, you had better build people power. You had better recognize that for every $1 million that they put in a game, you better have 1,000 volunteers. You better literally do the organizing that allows you to counter money power. And that is very hard. It takes an immense amount of time. It is not easy, but it is necessary.
2011 was the year people power struck back at the pay-to-play system. It started in the desert, where the Koch brothers' annual secret retreat with billionaires was about to become less secret.
What started out as a single person reading a newspaper article and thinking to themselves, hey, what if we were to drive out to the desert and stand out there with signs, turned into thousands of people showing up.
We are the leaders we have been waiting for.
What we need is a power shift, and that begins by taking corporations out of our democracy.
What's really fascinating is that we happened to catch one of the Koch brothers, I think it was David Koch, sitting up in the balcony, watching down at the protesters with a look of severe indigestion. And I don't know if that was something that he had just eaten or if he was just really thrown off by the fact that there were so many people right across the street who really wanted to shine the light on what the Koch brothers were trying to do up until now in total secrecy.
I think Citizens United struck a nerve. The Robert Supreme Court may have underestimated how many people would care about this issue.
When I saw how many people showed up in the desert to help drag the Koch brothers out of the shadows, it gave me new hope. It was even more inspiring to see Ohioans organize to take down Alec's anti-union law.
You had to gather the better part of 300,000 signatures. That takes thousands of volunteers and hundreds of thousands of hours. When they came in, they filed 1.3 million signatures. The issue got put on the ballot. People got to vote up or down. 61% of Ohioans voted for collective bargaining. And so what you start to see is people power. Organized people can upset the most powerful economic and political interests in our country and can change things. They did it in Ohio, and I happen to think we can do it in states across this country.
And then people power stepped up to the source of these laws, ALEC. At that point, so few people had heard of ALEC that the protest organizers were happy if anybody showed up to demonstrate.
I think that one thing that has worked to galvanize people in ways that we haven't seen before is just how vicious the legislation against working people is.
What the protest organizers didn't know was that someone who worked with ALEC was watching them, and they had a change of heart. They leaked hundreds of copies of ALEC's legislation templates. This finally showed how far ALEC's influence spanned.
Shocked by what she came in contact with. Wow, this is amazing stuff.
When you stand up in public and speak, you don't know who you're going to reach.
The Nation magazine and the Center for Media and Democracy were both leaked a set of ALEC materials.
You couldn't write the story better than the reality of it. And the amazing thing was, it went way deeper than we had thought. Here you had bill after bill after bill. It was literally being implemented in states across the country.
Paul Weyrich, back in 1980, he gave the Rosetta Stone for how to steal votes in the modern age. Speaking in 1980 at a Baptist convention down in Texas with Jerry Falwell and Ronald Reagan by his side.
Now, many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome. Good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Here we are 25 years later, and this is being put in place by his organization, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is funded by the Kochs.
The Koch brothers were the ones who put the money behind Powell's call to arms.
And then ALEC legislators take the bills and they introduce them in legislatures across the country as if they were their own original ideas.
The Center for Media and Democracy set up ALEC Exposed, a website sharing ALEC's model legislation with expert analysis. This made it possible for others to join the fight against ALEC.
So late last year, Color of Change launched a campaign targeting the corporate sponsors of ALEC. It was specifically focused on the voter suppression bills, the voter ID bills that ALEC has been pushing, or that legislators have been pushing around the country.
You're more likely to get hit by lightning than to have in-person voter fraud.
We were concerned because we saw the ways in which these voter ID bills stand to disenfranchise up to 5 million people.
So corporations who every single day come to black folks and say, buy our products or use our services, these corporations were working with ALEC to push all sorts of laws that hurt our community.
We had already launched a campaign focused on the voter ID bills, but suddenly here's this other piece of legislation that's incredibly dangerous to the black community, and here's this tragedy that's in the news that brings to light exactly how bad these stand-your-ground bills are.
The law that was shielding George Zimmerman, the killer of Trayvon, from being arrested was an ALEC law. And so as our members are standing up and chanting justice for Trayvon, we were talking to these corporations. We wanted them to leave ALEC. It was time to escalate on Coke. We gave Coke 48 hours. Coke ignored us. So we went out to our members 48 hours later and started having them make phone calls. We also went to the press and started a conversation there. Within 5 hours of our members calling Coca-Cola, Coke left ALEC. Over the course of the next several weeks, a number of other corporations started to drop. McDonald's, Kraft, Johnson & Johnson, Walmart. We ran radio ads against corporations. We showed up to shareholder board meetings, took over social media pages, all intended to leverage the voice of everyday people, black folks and their allies, ensuring that their voices were being heard.
So when people come together, that's our power. That's what we have to go up against the big money from the corporations. And when people come together, we can actually win things.
From a small protest outside an ALEC meeting to a national boycott that sent its members fleeing, it always starts and grows with people power. That's what happened when people power took on Wall Street. And it electrified the world. I couldn't believe it. It was beautiful. Almost overnight, people were taking to the streets in hundreds of cities across the country and around the world. And they were talking about money in politics, corporate tax dodgers, and how all these problems stem from the cost of running for office.
We're here to take our country back from the corporations that can contribute unlimited sums of money into our election process.
1% of our population calls all the shots and makes all the decisions for the other 99%.
Protesters appear to have a number of different goals, but how strongly united do you think they really are?
The protests are so united that they didn't even need a common purpose to be stated. This was the one protest where you could ask someone why they were there, and they would reply, "Why the F do you think?"
I wasn't personally able to occupy, but I lent my voice how I could.
If you can't get 1,000 people behind you holding signs up, you know what? Paint a painting and put it on the street. 1,000 people will see it.
Where else is there besides the streets? When I saw street art that spoke up for something I agreed with, it felt empowering. I wanted to give that feeling to other people. Just knowing people were seeing it made me feel good. It felt like one person could make a big statement. It's like when you see something and have an idea on how to improve it, and then eventually you just can't stop yourself from acting on it. I thought the Mission Impossible billboards captured what the Occupy protests were about.
You don't have a lobbyist, basically. And what you need is, you shouldn't have to have a lobbyist. You shouldn't be competing against lobbyists.
You might want to consider contributing to some sort of piece.
Street art, well, you obviously haven't seen any of the art I've made in my life, or you wouldn't ask that question. The return on investment in politics for the money you spend is astonishing.
If you're going to challenge the money power, you had better build people power.
Citizens United will mark the beginning of another wave of fundamental reform.
The parties are basically two factions of one party, the business party.
I appreciate what you're doing. I think it's a form of resistance.
I appreciate that, Eric. You have a good taste in law.
I've arrested many people during demonstrations, and I always explain to them that, I'll explain the law to them. I said, I understand that many times being arrested is part of the political act, and therefore I will do it, and I will do it as kind a way as I can.
Yeah.
Some of my greatest heroes in my life have been arrested. Jesus Christ was arrested. Martin Luther King was arrested.
I had to face the law. The city considers street art vandalism. And besides, my experience with the police was nothing like what the people at Occupy camps were going through.
Occupy Wall Street was really a very important movement. There were questions early on about were they doing anything that was really making a difference to voice their concerns about money and politics. What these documents showed is that they made a huge impact. They scared the shit out of the federal government.
Listen up, you can still leave without being arrested.
The federal government looked at these people as domestic terrorists.
Stay peaceful! We are peaceful!
That in some of these documents, they were giving briefings to the bankers, essentially more interested in protecting the bankers who were not being prosecuted by Congress for bringing the country to its knees. They were showing themselves to be really on the side of Wall Street. They needed to do something to suppress and dismantle that movement because of the impact they were having.
Now that the Occupy movement had been chased away by local police and the Department of Homeland Security, May 1st, May Day, was marked as the return of Occupy. May Day is a traditional holiday for the labor and immigration movements. I wanted to show support and share what I learned about how the pay-to-play system works. I pulled together my street artist friends to help make a plan for May Day. I spoke to my friend Teacher, who started doing street art for the same reasons that I did.
When I decided that I was going to become a father, it made me want to put images out there that would try to help the world become a better place. I have two 17-month-old children. I don't want them to grow up in a country that's well defended but not well educated.
I had this crazy idea and I want to see if anyone could help me. You would. I'd love to try to turn that intersection into a Monopoly board.
If I got the cutout letters that I'm just spraying and going along, it's gonna go pretty quickly. Maybe like a week or so.
Wow. Yeah, people are gonna trip over that, dude. Well, not, hopefully not.
Break a leg.
That's what I hope doesn't happen.
I scoped out the intersection. Teacher scored some billboard vinyl. Street artists talk about a billboard takeover, but this was a real billboard takeover.
I get a sense of feeling like I'm at least accomplishing something. I'm getting a piece out there that it may not reach very many people, but if it reaches the right person, that's all that really counts. Because you can reach 1 million people, and if it's not the right person, it's not going to make a difference. But if it just happens to be the right person, and happens to be a prodigy or something like that, then it's all worth it.
On May Day, Teacher and our other street artist friends were ready. But it dawned on me that I had no idea if we were even going to be able to pull this off.
I don't know, we just playing it by ear because we don't really know how this thing is going to work out. Is it going to be massive or small? Hopefully that nobody shows up. And then I don't have to run. I'm not controlling none of these people. They can do what they want. I don't care.
Teacher and I scoped out the May Day parade route, and we went for it. Spectators gathered. I looked around, and the cops weren't stopping us. Everyone was looking, taking pictures. And then the intersection turned into a party.
Right now I'm standing in the middle of 6th Street and Broadway, where a giant board has been set up.
A lot of people are like, oh, I know this and this and this, but what's this and this and this? And so that's the best thing I can hope for.
We've got to be the ones to stick up for the best in the American dream, what's left of it, the good part of it. You shouldn't have to be born rich to make it in America. Everybody should have a shot in America. That's the American dream.
Corporations are profit-driven, they serve the god of profit, and they are willing to sacrifice anyone on their altar. And unless we stand up and stop them, no one will stop them. We either get out in the street and protect what's left of our anemic democracy, or we watch it snuffed out. And I think we're the last thin line of defense.
We have to go beyond trying to lobby our congresspeople, to convince our congresspeople. We have to, become our congresspeople.
It's an amazing thing when you hear your own voice come out of your mouth and when it's loud, right? It's an amazing thing to look at video and be like, wow, that was me and this mattered. And I think that people have been starting to get out there and do that in ways that are empowering.
In 2014, the Supreme Court doubled down on Citizens United in 2 new decisions.
This case should be named Money versus the People, not McCutcheon versus the FEC.
In McCutcheon versus FEC, the court ruled that preventing Sean McCutcheon from contributing millions of dollars directly to candidates was an unfair limit on his freedom of speech. In the Hobby Lobby decision, the court decided that a corporation can decline to pay for part of its employees' insurance plan if it violates that closely held corporation's freedom of religion. The stakes have never been higher. I concluded that a few significant reforms could go a long way toward returning the public voice to our elections. Public financing for campaigns. Anyone should be able to run for office, not just millionaires. Disclosure. Campaign contributions and expenditures should have the donors' names on public record. End gerrymandering. Prevent politicians from picking their voters instead of voters picking their politicians. Free airtime. If airtime were free, candidates would not need to raise so much money. Compulsory voting. Most Americans don't vote, and instead of making it harder to vote, we should be asking all Americans what they want. Australia, Brazil, and other countries require all citizens to vote. A constitutional amendment saying that corporations are not considered people and money is not considered speech. Because Americans are ready to put an end to pay-to-play politics. Just ask Gene Schmidt. The House Ethics Committee rebuked Gene Schmidt for improper financial support from Turkish lobbyists. It takes a lot to get rebuked by other pay-to-play politicians. This didn't play well in the heartland of Ohio. And in the next Republican primary, Gene Schmidt lost in a surprise to a political newcomer.
Really been a celebration here at this Tea Party gathering. You fully realize how few incumbents lose in a primary.
Also losing in the 2012 primary, David Krikorian, who ran again for the Democratic nomination, only to lose to another candidate who had registered but never campaigned. Ohioans went out of their way to vote against David Krikorian in favor of some other guy no one knew anything about. It seemed like Surya's race was having repercussions years later.
I was thinking back to the guy from ABC yesterday who interviewed me, and he asked the same question that everybody asks. You'd be a freshman legislator, and there'd just be one of you. You know, what difference could you really make? What impact can one person make? They make all the impact, because somebody's got to start everything, right? Somebody's got to stand up, and maybe they'll get the rocks thrown at them, and maybe they'll sort of take the beating, but somebody else could see it, and then they step up. It's garbage, and I hope that's never the takeaway from anything in life. I mean, all it takes is one person.
I hope Paul Hackett takes some great courage from knowing that his crusade to get people to see the truth about what was wrong with our policy in Iraq has now swept the country.
If that's my footnote in history, that's not a bad footnote to have. So,
it's always one person, right? When you're in a crowd of 1 million people protesting against something, when you're in Tahrir Square in Cairo, or in the streets of Madison, Wisconsin, when you're at Occupy Wall Street, you ultimately come there as an individual. You decide that you're going to step out of the simple day-to-day life and make yourself part of something much bigger. When we do that, we come in many, many different ways. Some of us will write the words on a signboard and walk through the street. Some of us will write. Some of us will make a documentary. Some of us will simply be present at the point when somebody else wants to tell us something about a big organization doing very dark things. And it's always a question of how we act upon it. And you know what makes us act in the best of ways? Is our naivete and our innocence. It's not our cynicism. If you're really cynical, you'd say, well, there's nothing we can do about that. That's money, that's power. But if you still have an ability to be shocked and to say, this is entirely unacceptable. I want to expose this. I've found out that people are legislating in my name, but without my informed consent. This is destroying democracy itself. I, as a citizen, object. And I'm going to call people, I'm going to tell them, and I'm going to believe that when we tell people about what's going on, that just shining the light of day on it will begin a process of change.
We can all use our voice in different ways, but you have to find your own voice. If you keep quiet, you can start to feel alone, like your existence doesn't matter. It felt good having spoken out. Once you see people feel the same as you, it gives you confidence. You feel part of something bigger.
Daddy used to play this game, but we're not gonna play this game. I don't think this is a good game. I think you're gonna like playing this game, anti-monopoly. It's about trying to make sure you break up monopolies. Because what do we want? An open market. Right, okay.